Hello folks, Milo89 here. Welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to jump on to speak a little bit about alien abduction and what kind of is going on there with the agendas and some of the things you might experience symptoms wise if you feel like you have been abducted yourself, in regards to loss of time jumping, things shifting, you obviously moving location all of a sudden when you're kind of reinserted, and also experiencing like lacerations or markings and cuts and stuff around your body and bruises in random places, and also like dreams, like actually experiencing and having full knowledge of you being abducted. So if that's the case, then you have been, because what was interesting, after uploading the video yesterday about me experiencing Hathor in the dream state, which was very vivid, where I had two massive cuts with an entity that seemed to have like 3 talons, and it lacerated my forearm and my upper arm. Anyway, what happened that afternoon was really quite interesting. I all of a sudden out of nowhere developed 3 lacerations on the tip of my thumb. I don't know if you can see it here, but it was like 3 really fine paper cuts, and I didn't handle any paper. I was just sat here doing a bit of work, and all of a sudden this sting came on and these cuts, and I was like, oh fuck, I wonder whether I was maybe abducted, or there could have been some transfer from that dream state in the astrals down here in the physical. And so I'll talk about that first. So it's, one or two things when you experience things like this that, you could be taking, and they could be running their kind of checks, genetic code checks and DNA programs of bioregenesis that this place has been set up to do down here as part of your soul contract, or some of the intrusive ETs coming in just to do what they please in terms of, running all their experiments. Or it could also be a morphogenetic transfer of manifestation, albeit subtly and a bit weaker, down here as above so below. And to give more emphasis to this fact of how things that happen in the astrals when you're in the dream state lucidly can affect you down here, is quite simple, because it's happened to me many times in regards to spilling the seed. Being encountered with succubus, especially for men, being encountered by succubuses and shapeshifters in the astral state, where they seduce you and basically get you to have sex with them, so you spill your seed and spunk everywhere. You basically, as above, so below, would wake up and you would spunk your boxes, which is a bit of a nuisance. You have a wet dream, basically. So you can see how things that affect you up in the astrals in the dream state have a direct correspondence consciously down here to your body. So if you lose the seed up there, you lose the seed down here. And also, if you get cut up there, or bruised or whacked or whatever, you can also experience, albeit subtly, morphogenetically, that imprint can put that kind of information into your DNA coding, which can then later manifest through matter and externalize through your body, as in like some of the symptoms like these cuts and bruises. This is why when you're being siphoned for energy up in the astrals and you've got a lot of parasites and entity attachments and stuff, you can walk around down here feeling dazed, confused, fatigued all the time, and you just got no idea why. And you're eating healthy, you're doing all the right things. It's because higher aspects of yourself are being siphoned, like that soul energy, which otherwise natural universal systems has the breath of the universal eternal energies that flow in from source and back out again. And so if there's blockages where there's entities actually feeding off that flow of energy that comes in and comes back out, and this obviously goes into the genetic manipulations they've done down here and the frequency grids, which kind of cut all this off, which we've been all blocked by, which is why we experience death. This is the reason why. So that is one factor to consider, which I could have manifested through the dream state, but subtly through a marking under my thumb. However, I believe it is as a result of me possibly being picked up in the afternoon, and you might not even realise it, and sometimes their technologies are so advanced. If you've seen the movie Jupiter Ascending, you can see how these little greys basically operate, where they can just slip in and out, put you under, kind of a coma, as it were, and take you out and ship you through these time portals in the interdimensional gateways, and then reinsert you back into the same space-time location, albeit sometimes there is some errors or deviations, possibly based on what they've got going on, maybe some of the battles that's happening, and especially the intrusive ones. You'll know if it is done by the intrusive ETs, i.e. the guys who are just going against everyone's free will, just running their experiments willy-nilly without any regard to, you know, people's free will, you will experience that kind of draining of energy and a bit more kind of roughness about the experience. Whereas if it is part of a soul contract of you coming in here, knowing that you probably originate from a different star system within this cosmos, and you're here based on the Bioregenesis program in order to do the work to bring your DNA template back into a crystal imprint where you can develop the 4th and 5th strands of DNA activation, which will allow you to ascend into the high density 5th dimensional so-called Earth, which is known as Terra. And this is all part of the solar ascension cycles that have been going on. And because we were denied this opportunity to do this 25,000 years ago during the sinking of Atlantis, they basically did so much energy work here, the regressive ETs that is, they fucked the energy grids here on the Earth, which didn't allow for the emergence of the 5D and 3D Earth to come together to open up the gates in order to allow souls to ascend out of this density, because these gates only open up in order to seed new races and to, you know, develop genetically over time to seed and run their experiments and to do the bioregenesis programs, and or evacuate certain star systems and for ascension, basically to pull consciousness back up into the higher forms. So you could be experiencing abductions and you actually signed up for it before coming into this grid, but because of what's been done here ever since ancient Atlantis, during, you know, based on the Luciferian program and what they've done going against the Emerald Covenant and stuff like this, they have obviously set up a frequency fence, which basically means that when you incarnate into these bodies, 90% of your consciousness that otherwise should be here with your body, with your awareness and the abilities that you can have with that, is shut off due to the energy grid that's surrounding the Earth, the Van Allen belt, and the morphogenetic Metatronic inversion of energies there, as well as the DNA manipulation that they've done, the coding, where they basically switched off a lot of what's otherwise in our junk DNA, our ability to manifest morphogenetically through our imprints, energetic imprints, to instruct ourselves to put those DNA strands together so we can actually harness more of our consciousness. So we're running around with only 10% of our true soul capacity, awareness and conscious ability. And so obviously when that happens, you are completely born into this world without really little memory. Obviously the higher indigo children and souls are starting to, you know, kind of break down some of those buffers when incarnating into this grid, as cracks are starting to appear during these cycles. But for the vast majority, you know, memory only comes through certain activations during your life here in order to help, you know, shift the grids. But this is why, you know, they do the things they do with the HARP technologies, the 5G, the vaccines, and the poison of the food supply, the waters, because it's all designed to basically stop you from instructing your cells to recompose what's in your junk DNA, so you can start building those, you know, 4th and 5th strands and putting those parts of yourselves, you're selling the memory back together so you can remember exactly what the fuck is going on in this cosmos and what you've been sent here to do and what races you have mixed in your genetic blueprint. Because if you were here on like the kind of benevolent side, a lot of the human race was basically created in order to obviously be guardians of certain planets or where the Stargate systems are, in order to transfer organically between dimensions and densities, and also to help fallen races who have a lot of genetic distortions as they evolved and kind of inbred to the point where there was errant deviations in their patterns of DNA, which made them lose that Christic spark consciousness of, you know, the emotional body, basically of having empathy for other creatures and knowing how to live in harmony with other entities. That was lost. And so the human race were created by the Christos founders races 550 million years ago in order to help some of the fallen races that evolved to such a high level before these wars happened between the Elohim and the Seraphim up in the Lyra Stargate system. which obviously created a complete and utter catastrophe of all these fallen black hole systems down here and these phantom matrices and all these false creator gods and all these false creator races. So they basically create their own little universe, which was kind of like an offcut or like a tumour of our natural organic universe, which is just feeding off of it. And so rather than cut the tumour off, what these Christos founders races agreed to do was to allow for the regenesis, the bioregenesis of these fallen ETs, so they can work to regain their Christic blueprints, so they can come back into eternal life, rather than being given the ultimatum, which is literally going to happen after the solar ascension cycle, where this whole system and their universe, which is attached to our organic universe, their phantom matrix via the moon and the Saturn wormholes, plugins, they're going to cut it off completely. So they will not be able to feed on this organic universal system any longer, which is why this solar system ascension cycle that we're in is an evacuation. And so those souls who, are back on the path and choose to come back into alignment with the true Christo blueprint of universal harmony are going to be saved and be able to work towards developing their DNA strands further, so they can come back into, what it means to be human and be of the Christic kind of core template of how these universal systems work. And so those beings who get cut off and cast down into the fallen phantom matrices are going to end up playing their own Battlestar Galactica, false creator gods saga for a couple of billion years before the whole system implodes on itself, because it's in a finite energy supply. It's not being fed the eternal life supply from the source, and then they'll just be returned as space dust, and that energy will be used in this organic universe to repurpose and form new elements for life to evolve and coexist in. So they'll actually lose their conscious identity, which is a pretty damning ultimatum. And this is why they know they have to act so desperately, because they're met with that fate. The ones who have chosen not to do the bioregenesis, who are too far gone, who realise that if they take up this bioregenesis program in order to incarnate here into Earth and be merged with the human body, so their codes can start being fixed by the human core blueprint from the Turanusian race, then they're going to have to take a massive step back in their evolutionary cycle and almost start from scratch, but they were still able to maintain their conscious self-identity of self, if that makes sense. So it's pretty deep what's going on here, but hopefully that gives you a bit more sense as to why you might be getting abducted, because you are probably working with other races, or some of your founding races or your soul family, soul matrix groups who are from certain star systems, who are helping these fallen races to integrate through you and through your genetic blueprint, or through a human template rather, for you to develop the fourth and fifth strands to get that Christic core blueprint back. Which is why you've got many souls that incarnate down here in humans. They're otherwise wearing masks, where in reality they could be Dracos, Zetas, all kinds of Anunnakians, crossbred with all these other different races, because it's all there in our genetic code. Now, this is a library, and there's so many different races that are walking around, and the ones who have come into this system to integrate with the human template to generate that Christic blueprint, they're the ones who are most susceptible for takeover and possession and manipulation by the fallen ET races, and that's the Illuminati bloodlines. And so a lot of them actually get compromised because they've defected against the so-called dark empire, the evil empire of these fallen races, and thought, fuck that, I don't want to play these false demigod creator gods anymore, war all the time, and fight amongst each other, because they're all fighting amongst each other for dominion too. Not only the Christos founders races and the guardians of this whole universal system and the human race, but they're fighting amongst each other. It's just literally like the orcs out of Lord of the Rings. There's no real honour amongst thieves, and they always cut each other's backs, throats, and step on one another and cheat on one another, as well as the human race. And so this is what they do, and this is why they're susceptible, because they are genetically actually weak compared to the human race and the Turanusian race for that matter. And so this is why a lot of them fall victim to being possessed, for their thoughts being twisted, in order to set up these kind of social economic systems where everyone is under the cosh and put into these scarcity economic systems, because that's where they come from. They come from a universe where they're cut off from the eternal flow of creation of source. So their whole model is based on scarcity, and they have to feed off other organic life forms like parasites. So they're constantly running around having to look for food in fear of losing their immortality. And that's a pretty lousy existence, but it makes them a very dangerous fucking set of races and entities to, you know, go up against, because their whole modus operandi is survival. It's like an alligator, yeah? You get an alligator, and this is the perfect reptilian brain. It would eat its own children if it didn't have enough food in the environment to survive. And this is the kind of things they get up to. So yeah, I thought I'd get on here because I've had a dream as well where I've actually encountered these greys, and they were basically showing me how the holographic technology works in terms of making them appear human with manipulating the scalar waves, and obviously how our eyes perceive light around their normal figure makes them appear human, and it's quite sophisticated technology. And I remember they were also showing me, because I was battling a few of them, because they were actually they're trying to siphon energy from me, but I woke up in the dream state and they're trying to like pin me under, and it didn't work. And they were human, but then they shapeshifted into being greys. And then when I went back into a room with the guy I was with, one of them was on the floor, and they were kind of like morphogenetically siphoning energy from the guy who was asleep in the astrals that they put him asleep. We were probably asleep in the real world down here, and I can see this kind of like transfer of energy happening over to the grey. And when I came in, I kind of like stomped on him and it stopped him, and he kind of got up and he sat down, and these other three greys came in and sat down next to me, and they looked all defeated because they knew like it was almost like they couldn't do anything with me and what was going on. They felt ashamed, and they showed me these collars they were wearing, and they kept switching it on and off, and they could see them shapeshift into a human form and then back again. I was thinking, wow. And I remember chatting to him, I was like, why are you doing all this? It was kind of a bit like, you know, you need to stop doing all this. Is it like disappointing? Like, you guys have come this far, you've digressed this far, this is what you guys are getting up to. It was a really quite interesting dream. And there was another one, obviously, where I had, I think I briefly mentioned this in the beginning, but where I had an experience of being awake in the dream state, but I was halfway through being taken, and I knew I was being taken, but I couldn't see the entities, but I just started lashing out and like, you know, moving my arms around and stuff and fighting them off. And all of a sudden I woke up back in my bed with like a little bit of a thud. And anyway, next morning I woke up and I kind of had a massive cut, like a triangular cut on my forehead, which is obviously the triangles linked with the Zeta, the Illuminati, which is another thing. If you look at the last two variants of so-called COVID with the Delta and the Omicron, well, the Delta is otherwise the triangle sign, and the Omicron is the O. And what's interesting too is Omicron is one of the draconian races that was actually responsible for triggering the wars 250 billion years ago, as they were fighting against I think it was the Elohim, which obviously then created the Anunnakian races, and then all these different races and factions that have been fighting for whatever since then, over dominion for the universe. So yeah, I found that really quite interesting. So if you ever get any markings, typical, you almost get sometimes 3 dots, triangles, or like I said, lacerations like this where there's 3. 3 seems to be obviously a very common number that they use with the Illuminati and these false intrusive ET races. You could be being abducted, and they're doing it solely for the purposes of genetic mutations, experimentations, and obviously bioregenesis programs in order to help their defected races from, you know, falling into a phantom matrix where they're just going to end up being eliminated, and they've got a path of redemption through the human Christic template. But that also makes them exposed, because a lot of the races, it's like signing up to Hell's Angels and the Mafia, and all of a sudden, all your lifetime, then all of a sudden you turn against them, go against their backs to help the other team that you're up against your whole life, because you want a way out, and so you become a target for them to basically try to put you down and try to stop that from happening, because you kind of like swore blood oath or something like this. You know, you can imagine how this whole works. So this is why it's such a mess down here, but this is why we're gonna end up leaving pretty soon, and this is, you know, what the gates are open as we speak, and so this is why we're going to see over the next few years or next couple of decades huge depopulation agendas. This is either going to happen through, you know, the virus that's going around and natural cataclysms, and also with what they're forcing onto people, which I would be very skeptical about and wary about, because that is otherwise, really recoding your DNA, and it's probably going to undo a lot of the work that's otherwise going to be done in order to help save you, or those souls, those regressive souls who want to try to, or seeking a path back, through these bioregenesis programs for the organic eternal ascension and the opportunity to become eternal in that sense, rather than being, cast into these phantom matrices and cut off from source, so you can just wither away once you run out of energy and return to space dust without any conscious identity whatsoever. So yeah, thought I'd share that anyway. Really interesting topic. We're all kind of becoming more aware of these things, and there's more people coming out and remembering, which is great. But inevitably, I think the only way we're going to get out of this system is through death. And so our consciousness is then going to transcend back up into the density 2, harmonic universe 2, in the 5th dimension, and inhabit a body there in Tara, which is literally heaven compared to this place. It's a higher octave of Earth. Earth is going to do what's called a Kali Rayma step back, where she's not going to fall into the matrix, because she agreed to take on board all these lost souls for this bioregenesis program until this time came. And due to all the warring that's been happening and the grid work and the fucking around with energies in the solar system and on Earth, means that our sun's going to die, and unfortunately everyone has to be evacuated during this time, because there's not going to be enough time to wait for another solar ascension cycle before this system falls into that phantom matrix. So in a nutshell, this is it. So for those on the path who consciously choose, the Christ consciousness, which is just living in harmony with everyone else and respecting their free will, you're going to end up back on Tara, and hopefully not be sucked into where these regressive races want you to be, so they can feed off you until inevitably it's all turn to space dust, which is pretty depressing, to be honest. If you gotten this far, you've been about for millions and millions of years, working your way up from the elemental kingdom to the plant kingdom to the animal kingdom, and then into human form. You've been around for a long, long time, and so it's about time we make that choice. And I think most of us will choose eternity and the Christic kind of way of life, so we can head back towards who we're truly meant to be, which is 12 dimensional beings with the abilities that would seem godlike to us right now, but that's what we once had. So it's about time we reclaim our heritage. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed that. I'll speak to you all very soon. Take care of yourselves. Cheers. Bye-bye.